A dog keep barking near the tomb of a young woman. What they discover left them speechless. In the quiet, forgotten corners of a small town nestled between rolling hills and dense woods, there stood an ancient cemetery. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, its gravestones weathered by countless seasons, each bearing names that had long faded from living memory. Among these solemn markers was the tomb of a young woman, whose story had been whispered through generations, but never fully understood. Her name, barely legible now, was carved into a simple stone that leaned slightly as if burdened by the weight of untold secrets. Retired Sheriff Thomas Grayson lived just a short walk from this eerie resting place. A man of 65, his life had been dedicated to upholding law and order in the town he loved, until arthritis and a heart condition forced him into retirement. Now his days were filled with the simple pleasures of country living, tending to his garden, reading old detective novels, and taking long walks with his loyal companion Max, a spirited golden retriever who had been by his side for nearly a decade. Max was more than just a pet. He was a confidant, a partner in the solitude of Thomas's retired life. Every evening, they would stroll through the winding paths of the countryside, Max's keen nose leading them on adventures that kept Thomas connected to the world beyond his porch. But recently, their routine had taken a curious turn. Each night, as they approached the old cemetery, Max would grow restless, his ears perking up and his pace quickening. It wasn't until they neared the tomb of the young woman that Max would begin to bark, a sound so persistent and urgent that it echoed through the stillness of the graveyard like a ghostly alarm. Thomas, initially dismissing the barking as mere excitement or perhaps a reaction to some unseen wildlife, soon found himself intrigued. There was something about the way Max behaved near that particular tomb, his eyes wide with what could only be described as recognition or even fear, that stirred a deep curiosity in the old sheriff. Despite his years away from active duty, Thomas's instincts were sharp, honed by decades of solving mysteries and confronting the darker sides of human nature. As nights turned into weeks, the barking continued, unrelenting and haunting. Each visit left Thomas pondering over the possible reasons behind Max's behavior. Was it merely a coincidence, or did the dog sense something beyond the veil of the ordinary? The tomb, shrouded in mystery and whispers of the past, seemed to beckon him closer, urging him to uncover the truth hidden beneath its cold, silent surface. With each passing day, the line between curiosity and compulsion blurred, pulling Thomas deeper into a puzzle that promised to unravel not just the secrets of the tomb, but perhaps also the lingering questions of his own past. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves as Thomas Grayson approached the cemetery gates one particularly chilly autumn evening. The sky above was a tapestry of dark clouds, intermittently pierced by the pale light of a waning moon. His breath formed small clouds in the frosty air, and the crunch of gravel underfoot seemed unusually loud in the otherwise silent night. Beside him, Max tugged at his leash, his body tense with anticipation, his eyes fixed intently on the path ahead that led directly to the tomb of the young woman. As they drew nearer, Max's behavior became increasingly agitated. His barking, which had started as a low, intermittent warning, escalated into a frantic, continuous howl that reverberated off the ancient stones surrounding them. Thomas tightened his grip on the leash, trying to calm the dog, but Max was relentless. His paws scraped against the ground, kicking up small clouds of dust, and his tail was stiff, a clear sign of distress. It was unlike anything Thomas had witnessed before. Max, usually so composed and obedient, seemed overtaken by a force that defied explanation. Thomas knelt beside Max, placing a reassuring hand on his back, feeling the rapid rise and fall of the dog's chest.
What is it, boy?
He murmured, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of barks. But Max offered no response other than a piercing stare directed toward the tomb. The intensity of his gaze sent a chill down Thomas's spine. He followed the direction of Max's eyes, focusing on the weathered stone that marked the resting place of the young woman. In the dim light, the inscription appeared more pronounced, almost glowing, as if beckoning him closer. Unable to resist the pull of curiosity mixed with a burgeoning unease, Thomas stepped forward, dragging Max along gently. As they approached, the barking ceased abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural growl emanating from deep within Max's throat. The sudden silence was deafening, amplifying the eerie atmosphere enveloping them. Thomas felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead, his heart pounding in his chest as he stared at the tomb. Something about the scene felt profoundly wrong, yet inexplicably compelling. He reached out a trembling hand toward the tombstone, the tips of his fingers brushing against the cold, rough surface. At that moment, Max let out a sharp yelp, jerking back violently and nearly pulling Thomas off balance. The leash slipped from his grasp and Max bolted, circling around the tomb, his movements erratic and panicked. Thomas watched in stunned silence, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. What had spooked Max so intensely? Was it something tangible, or was it the supernatural element that local legends whispered about? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Thomas had always been a man of logic and reason, his career built on facts and evidence. Yet standing there amidst the shadows of the past, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the brink of uncovering something extraordinary. The tomb, with its cryptic aura, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, challenging everything he believed in. Forcing himself to focus, Thomas took a deep breath and called out to Max, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Slowly the dog calmed, returning to his side, with his tail tucked between his legs, a look of confusion and fear in his eyes. Thomas crouched down, embracing Max, feeling the rapid heartbeat gradually slow under his touch.
"It's okay, boy,"
he whispered, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. As they stood there, the reality of the situation began to sink in. This was no ordinary occurrence. Something profound and unsettling was unfolding before his eyes. The connection between Max's inexplicable behavior and the mysterious tomb was undeniable. Thomas knew then that he couldn't leave without answers. Whatever secrets lay buried beneath that stone, they were calling out to him, demanding to be unearthed. And as much as the rational part of his mind urged caution, the thrill of discovery, the prospect of solving one last great mystery, was too powerful to ignore. The following morning, Thomas Grayson sat at his kitchen table, the first light of dawn casting long shadows across the worn wooden surface. Before him lay a map of the old cemetery, its intricate details highlighted by the soft glow of the rising sun. His mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, swirling with the events of the previous night. Max lay quietly at his feet, his earlier frenzy replaced by a subdued watchfulness, as if he too sensed the gravity of what they had encountered. Thomas traced the map with a finger, pausing at the spot where the young woman's tomb rested. His initial instinct was to dismiss the incident as a mere anomaly. Perhaps a stray animal or some environmental factor had triggered Max's reaction. However, the vivid memory of Max's intense gaze and the abrupt cessation of his barking when they touched the tombstone lingered in his mind. It was as if the dog had communicated something beyond his understanding, a message from the depths of the unknown. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and the remnants of his investigative instincts, Thomas decided to delve deeper into the history surrounding the tomb. His first step was to revisit the town's archives, housed in the basement of the local library. The room was a labyrinth of dusty shelves and forgotten documents, a treasure trove for anyone seeking to uncover the past. As he sifted through yellowed newspapers and brittle ledgers, Thomas felt a familiar thrill, the same rush he used to experience while piecing together clues during his tenure as sheriff. Hours passed as he meticulously examined records, cross-referencing dates and names. Gradually, fragments of information began to coalesce into a coherent narrative. The young woman buried in the tomb, Eleanor Whitmore, had been a celebrated figure in the town's history, known for her beauty and kindness. She had tragically died at the age of 22 under mysterious circumstances, her death ruled as an accident by drowning. However, whispers of foul play had circulated among the townsfolk, fueled by the sudden disappearance of her fiancé shortly after her demise. The more Thomas read, the more he realized that Eleanor's story was intertwined with the town's darker chapters. Old articles hinted at a scandal involving prominent families, suggesting that her death might have been more than a mere mishap. Theories ranged from a botched elopement attempt to a cover-up orchestrated by those in power to protect their reputations. Each piece of information added layers to the mystery, drawing Thomas further into the enigma. His investigation was not without challenges. Many records were incomplete or deliberately vague, possibly altered over time to obscure the truth. Frustration mounted as he encountered dead ends, yet each setback only fueled his determination. He remembered the countless cases he had solved in his career, often against overwhelming odds, and drew strength from those memories. The skills he had honed over decades, patience, persistence, and an eye for detail, were now his most valuable tools. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas's routine changed. Mornings were spent poring over documents, afternoons walking through the cemetery with Max, observing every detail around the tomb. He noticed subtle changes in the environment, the shifting patterns of shadows, the peculiar alignment of nearby trees, and the faint etchings on adjacent stones that seemed to tell their own stories. Each observation was logged in a notebook, alongside sketches and notes that mapped out potential connections. One afternoon, as he sat on a bench near the tomb, Thomas reflected on the irony of his situation. Here he was, a retired sheriff, drawn back into the world of mysteries, not by duty, but by an insatiable thirst for knowledge. The tomb, once just a backdrop to his evening walks, had become the epicenter of his existence, a focal point around which his daily activities revolved. Max, ever the faithful companion, seemed attuned to his master's quest, his presence a constant reminder of the bond they shared and the journey they were on together. Despite the mounting evidence pointing towards a complex web of deceit and tragedy, Thomas remained cautious. He knew better than to jump to conclusions, especially when dealing with matters steeped in history and conjecture. Yet the possibility that Eleanor's death was not what it seemed gnawed at him, urging him to dig deeper, to seek out truths that had been buried along with her. With each new discovery, the lines between the past and present blurred, weaving a tapestry of intrigue that pulled Thomas inexorably forward. The tomb was no longer just a stone monument. It was a gateway to a forgotten era, a silent witness to secrets that demanded to be heard. And as he stood there, notebook in hand, the realization dawned on him. He was not merely searching for answers about Eleanor Whitmore. He was unraveling threads of a larger narrative, one that might redefine his understanding of the town he had served and the legacy he wished to leave behind. On a crisp morning, with the sun casting long shadows across the dew-kissed grass of the cemetery, Thomas Grayson stood poised at the edge of a decision that had been brewing in his mind for weeks. The culmination of his relentless research in the inexplicable behavior of Max had led him to this moment. Today, he would confront the physical embodiment of the mystery that had captivated his thoughts and haunted his dreams, the tomb of Eleanor Whitmore. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, the cool air biting at his cheeks as he approached the grave with a newfound resolve. Equipped with a small shovel and a flashlight, Thomas began to carefully excavate the soil around the base of the tombstone. The task was laborious, each thrust of the shovel breaking the silence of the cemetery with a dull thud. Max sat nearby, his eyes fixed intently on his master, occasionally letting out a soft whimper as if sensing the gravity of the act. Hours passed and the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its warming rays over the scene. Yet Thomas's determination did not waver. Sweat mingled with the dirt on his hands, but he pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and the need for closure. Finally, as the noon sun beat down mercilessly, Thomas's shovel struck something solid beneath the earth. His heart raced as he cleared away the remaining soil, revealing the edge of a wooden box. With trembling hands, he brushed off the dirt, exposing more of the box. It was old, the wood warped and splintered with age, but remarkably intact. Carefully, he pried open the lid, his breath catching in his throat as the contents came into view. Inside the box lay a collection of items that sent a shiver down Thomas's spine. There was a bundle of letters, their paper yellowed and fragile, tied together with a faded ribbon. A locket rested atop the letters, its metal tarnished but still bearing the delicate engraving of initials, E.W. Beside these personal effects was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and peeling. Thomas gingerly picked up the journal, opening it to find pages filled with elegant handwriting, detailing entries that spanned several months leading up to Eleanor's death. As he flipped through the pages, snippets of Eleanor's life unfolded before his eyes, her dreams, her fears, and her suspicions about those around her. The final entries were particularly chilling, hinting at a growing danger she felt closing in. One passage read,
I fear my love for him will be my undoing. They watch me, waiting for a misstep. I must be careful, but I am so tired of hiding.
The words resonated deeply with Thomas, painting a picture of a young woman caught in a web of deceit and danger, far removed from the peaceful rest her tomb suggested. The discovery was overwhelming. Thomas sat back on his heels, the journal clutched in his hands, his mind racing with the implications of what he had uncovered. The items in the box were more than mere artifacts. They were pieces of a tragic puzzle, each one a testament to the life and untimely death of Eleanor Whitmore. The letters, he realized, were exchanges between Eleanor and her fiancé, filled with declarations of love and plans for a future cruelly snatched away. The locket, when opened, revealed a tiny portrait of a handsome young man, presumably her fiancé, whose face was now etched in Thomas's memory. Each item told a story, weaving together a narrative of love, betrayal, and possibly murder. The realization hit Thomas with the force of a physical blow. Eleanor had not drowned accidentally. She had been silenced, her voice extinguished by those who feared the truth she carried. The evidence was circumstantial, yet compelling, pointing towards a cover-up orchestrated by those who sought to protect their own interests. Sitting amidst the scattered earth and the echoes of the past, Thomas felt a profound sadness wash over him. The vibrant life captured in the letters and the journal had been brutally cut short, leaving behind only whispers and shadows. Yet there was also a sense of vindication. Through his efforts, Eleanor's story was being brought to light, her voice given a chance to echo through the corridors of time once more. As he packed the items carefully back into the box, preparing to take them home for further examination, Thomas glanced at Max. The dog looked up at him with eyes that seemed to understand the significance of what had been found. Together they walked back towards the house, the weight of the past heavy on their shoulders, yet buoyed by the knowledge that they had uncovered a truth long buried beneath the silence of the tomb. Thomas Grayson sat alone in his dimly lit study, the items from the unearthed box spread out before him on the large oak desk. The room, usually a sanctuary of calm and order, now felt suffocating, the walls closing in as the enormity of his discovery weighed heavily on his conscience. The letters, the journal, the locket, all spoke of a life brimming with promise, cruelly extinguished. Each artifact was a thread in the tapestry of Eleanor Whitmore's tragic tale, a story that had lain dormant beneath the earth, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. The emotional toll was palpable. Thomas felt a profound sorrow, a grief that transcended the boundaries of time and space, connecting him to a woman he had never met but whose pain he now keenly felt. He read and reread the entries in the journal, each word a dagger piercing his heart. Eleanor's fears, her hopes, her undying love for a man whose fate was as mysterious as her own. It all painted a picture of a soul trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape the machinations of those who sought to control her destiny. Yet amidst the sorrow, anger simmered. Anger at the injustice, at the silencing of a voice that should have been heard. The more he delved into the contents of the box, the clearer it became that Eleanor's death was no accident. The letters hinted at threats, at a shadowy figure manipulating events from behind the scenes. The locket, with its image of the fiancé, was a poignant reminder of a love lost to the whims of power and greed. Thomas's fists clenched involuntarily as he imagined the fear Eleanor must have felt, the helplessness as she realized her life was spiraling out of her control. This anger, however, was tempered by a sense of responsibility. As a former sheriff, Thomas had dedicated his life to seeking justice, to ensuring that the voices of the oppressed were heard. Now faced with a case that transcended the bounds of his official duties, he felt an overwhelming obligation to right the wrongs of the past. The items before him were not just relics of a bygone era. They were cries for justice, pleas for someone to remember and to act. Max lay quietly at his feet, his usual exuberance subdued by the somber atmosphere. Occasionally, he would nudge Thomas's leg with his nose, as if offering silent support. The bond between man and dog, forged through years of companionship, provided a semblance of comfort. Yet even Max seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, his eyes reflecting a wisdom that belied his canine nature. As the hours ticked by, Thomas wrestled with the moral implications of his findings. Should he bring this to light, potentially reopening old wounds and stirring up a hornet's nest of controversy? Or should he let the past remain buried, respecting the silence that had endured for decades? The conflict tore at him, each option fraught with its own set of consequences. Ultimately, the decision was clear. Justice, no matter how delayed, was a debt owed to Eleanor Whitmore. Her story deserved to be told. Her voice deserved to be heard. Thomas resolved to share his findings to ensure that the truth was not lost to the annals of history. He would approach the local authorities, present the evidence he had gathered, and advocate for a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding Eleanor's death. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be resistance, skepticism, and perhaps even hostility from those who preferred the past to remain undisturbed. But Thomas was undeterred. The weight of discovery was heavy, but it was a burden he was willing to bear. For Eleanor, for the town, and for the principles he had sworn to uphold, he would see this through to the end. As he sat there, surrounded by the echoes of a life long gone, Thomas Grayson made a silent vow. He would honor Eleanor's memory, give voice to her silenced cries, and seek the justice she had been denied. The journey would be arduous, but the righteousness of the cause fortified his resolve. With Max by his side and the truth in his hands, he prepared to step once more into the arena of justice, ready to fight for a soul whose time had come to be remembered. The days that followed Thomas Grayson's discovery were a blur of activity and introspection. Each morning, as the first light filtered through the curtains of his modest home, Thomas found himself drawn back to the items from Eleanor Whitmore's tomb. They lay neatly arranged on his desk, silent witnesses to a past that refused to be forgotten. The journal, the letters, the locket, each piece seemed to whisper secrets, urging him to action. Yet the path forward was fraught with uncertainty, and the weight of his decision bore down on him with increasing intensity. Thomas spent hours poring over the documents, cross-referencing names and dates, piecing together the fragments of Eleanor's life. The more he learned, the more he realized the depth of the conspiracy that had likely led to her death. Prominent figures in the town's history were implicated, their descendants still wielding influence. The thought of confronting such entrenched power was daunting, but Thomas's resolve only hardened. He had faced similar battles in his career, standing firm against corruption and deceit, and he was determined to do so again, even if it meant standing alone. The emotional strain was evident. Sleep eluded him, his nights plagued by vivid dreams of Eleanor, a spectral figure pleading for justice. During the day, he found himself distracted, his thoughts constantly drifting back to the tomb and the secrets it held. Meals were forgotten, and his usual walks with Max became shorter, more aimless. Yet through it all, a fierce determination burned within him. He owed it to Eleanor, to the truth, and to himself to see this through. One evening, as he sat by the fireplace, Max curled up at his feet. Thomas allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about his years as sheriff, the countless cases he had solved, the lives he had touched. Each had left its mark, shaping him into the man he was today. But none had affected him as deeply as this. Eleanor's story was not just a mystery to be unraveled. It was a call to action, a reminder of why he had chosen this path in the first place. The next morning, Thomas rose with a renewed sense of purpose. He dressed carefully, choosing his attire with the same meticulous attention he had once reserved for court appearances. Today, he would take the first step toward justice. Gathering the documents, he placed them into a worn leather satchel, its straps creaking under the weight of history. Max followed him to the door, his eyes bright with the same unwavering loyalty that had seen them through countless adventures. The walk to the local authorities' office was a journey through the heart of the town he had served for so many years. Familiar faces greeted him, some with smiles, others with nods of respect. Yet beneath the surface courtesies, Thomas sensed a tension, an unspoken acknowledgement of the storm he was about to unleash. He pushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. Upon arriving at the office, Thomas was ushered into a small, cluttered room where he laid out his findings. The officials listened in silence, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and concern. When he finished, there was a long pause, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Finally, one of them spoke, voicing the doubts and fears that had likely crossed everyone's minds.
This is serious, Thomas. If what you say is true, it could shake the very foundations of this town.
Thomas nodded, his jaw set with determination.
I know,
He replied simply.
but isn't that what justice demands? To shine a light where darkness has festered for too long?
The meeting stretched on, discussions turning to strategies and plans. Thomas answered questions, provided additional context, and reiterated his commitment to seeing the investigation through. By the time he left the office, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets. Exhaustion tugged at him, but there was also a sense of relief. The first step had been taken, and though the road ahead was uncertain, he felt a glimmer of hope. That night, as he sat once more by the fire, Max resting contentedly at his side, Thomas allowed himself a small smile. The journey was far from over, but he had set the wheels in motion. Eleanor's voice, long silenced, was beginning to be heard. And though the echoes of the past still lingered, they no longer felt like chains binding him to sorrow. Instead, they were reminders of the strength found in seeking truth, in standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. As the flames danced in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls, Thomas felt a profound sense of peace. The path he had chosen was difficult, but it was the only one worth walking. For in the pursuit of justice, he had rediscovered not just the essence of his former self, but the enduring spirit of a man who refused to let the past remain buried. The days that followed Thomas Grayson's meeting with the local authorities were a whirlwind of activity, though outwardly little seemed to change. The town carried on as it always had. Children played in the streets, shopkeepers tended to their wares, and the cemetery remained a quiet, forgotten corner of the world. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, a storm was brewing. The officials Thomas had spoken to were cautious, their initial skepticism giving way to reluctant acknowledgement of the gravity of his findings. They began discreetly gathering evidence, interviewing descendants of those implicated in Eleanor Whitmore's story, and piecing together a timeline that stretched back over a century. For Thomas, the wait was excruciating. Each day felt like an eternity, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. He tried to occupy himself with routine tasks, tending to his garden, reading old detective novels, and taking Max for long walks. But his mind constantly drifted back to the investigation. Would they find enough evidence to reopen the case? Would the truth finally see the light of day? Or would it be buried once more under layers of denial and fear? Max seemed to sense his master's restlessness. The dog, usually so energetic and playful, became unusually subdued, often lying at Thomas's feet, with his head resting on his paws, his eyes following Thomas's every move. It was as if Max understood the gravity of what was unfolding and was offering silent support. On their walks, Max no longer tugged at the leash with his usual enthusiasm, but walked slowly beside Thomas, his steps measured and deliberate, as if he too were waiting for something to happen. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Thomas found himself standing once more at the edge of the cemetery. He hadn't planned to come here. His feet had simply carried him, drawn by some unseen force. The tomb of Eleanor Whitmore loomed before him, its weathered stone bathed in the soft glow of twilight. For the first time since uncovering its secrets, Thomas felt a strange sense of peace. The tomb no longer seemed ominous or foreboding. Instead, it radiated a quiet dignity, as if it had fulfilled its purpose by revealing the truth. He knelt beside the grave, running his fingers over the inscription.
Eleanor Whitmore.
He murmured aloud, the name rolling off his tongue like a prayer.
I won't let you down.
Max sat quietly beside him, his tail thumping softly against the ground. In that moment, Thomas felt a profound connection, not just to Eleanor, but to the countless others who had been silenced throughout history. Their voices, though faint, still lingered, waiting for someone to listen. Weeks turned into months, and just when Thomas began to fear that the investigation would fizzle out, a breakthrough came. One crisp autumn morning, as he sat sipping coffee on his porch, a car pulled up outside his house. It was one of the investigators he had met during his initial meeting, a young woman named Clara Bennett. She stepped out of the vehicle, her arms laden with folders and documents, her expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension.
Sheriff Grayson,
She said, approaching him with a respectful nod.
we need to talk.
Thomas invited her inside, his heart pounding with anticipation. Clara spread the documents across his kitchen table, explaining that they had uncovered a series of letters written by one of the town's founding families. These letters, hidden away in an attic for generations, detailed a conspiracy involving several prominent figures who had sought to protect their reputations by silencing Eleanor. The correspondence revealed not only their involvement in her death, but also their efforts to cover it up, including the disappearance of her fiancé, who had apparently fled the town in fear for his life.
This is it.
Clara said, her voice trembling with emotion.
This is the proof we've been looking for.
Thomas stared at the documents, his hands shaking as he picked them up. The words on the pages confirmed everything he had suspected, and more. The depth of the betrayal, the cruelty of the act, and the lengths to which these individuals had gone to conceal the truth left him reeling. But amidst the shock and anger, there was also a sense of vindication. Eleanor's voice, long silenced, was finally being heard. Clara explained that the authorities were preparing to issue formal statements, reopening the case and calling for a thorough investigation. Descendants of those involved were being questioned, and historians were being brought in to provide context and verify the authenticity of the newly discovered evidence. It was a monumental undertaking, one that would undoubtedly shake the foundations of the town. As Clara packed up the documents and prepared to leave, she turned to Thomas with a look of gratitude.
None of this would have happened without you.
She said.
You gave Eleanor a voice when no one else would.
Thomas nodded, unable to find the words to express the emotions swirling within him. As he watched Clara drive away, he felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for the justice that was finally being served. In the weeks that followed, the town was abuzz with the revelations. Headlines screamed from newspapers, and television crews descended upon the small community, eager to capture the drama unfolding before their lenses. For many residents, the news was a shock. For others, it confirmed long-held suspicions. Conversations around dinner tables and in coffee shops revolved around Eleanor Whitmore, her tragic fate, and the dark chapter in the town's history that had finally come to light. Through it all, Thomas remained a quiet figure, observing the chaos from the sidelines. He declined interviews and avoided the spotlight, preferring to let the evidence speak for itself. His role, he believed, was not to seek recognition, but to ensure that justice was done. Yet he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. After years of retirement, he had found a new purpose, a chance to make a difference, even in the twilight of his life. Max, ever the loyal companion, seemed to share in his master's contentment. The dog's energy returned, and their walks became joyful adventures once more. They often passed by the cemetery, where a steady stream of visitors now paid their respects to Eleanor's tomb. Flowers adorned the grave, and notes of apology and remembrance were tucked into the crevices of the stone. It was a testament to the power of truth and the enduring human desire for redemption. One evening, as Thomas sat on his porch watching the sun set, he reflected on the journey he had undertaken. It had been a difficult path, filled with challenges and moments of doubt. But it had also been a profoundly rewarding one, reaffirming his belief in the importance of seeking justice, no matter how daunting the task. He thought about Eleanor, whose memory had been honored, and the countless others whose stories remained untold. Though he could not right every wrong, he knew that every effort counted. As the stars began to twinkle in the vast expanse of the night sky, casting their gentle glow upon the quiet world below, Thomas leaned back in his chair, exhaling a slow, measured breath. The evening air was cool against his skin, carrying with it the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hum of crickets. Beside him, Max lay with his head resting comfortably on Thomas's knee, his steady breathing a soothing rhythm in the stillness of the night. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Thomas felt truly at peace. The past, with all its shadows and secrets, no longer loomed over him like an inescapable storm. It had not disappeared, nor had it lost its significance, but rather it had settled into its rightful place, a collection of lessons, reminders of pain and triumph, echoes of a life lived with both sorrow and strength. It no longer haunted him. Instead, it stood as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a proof that even the deepest wounds could heal, and even the most painful truths could set one free. And so, as the world moved forward, ever-changing and unpredictable, Thomas Grayson remained steadfast in his conviction. Justice, he had come to understand, was not merely a destination, some distant and definitive endpoint, but a journey, one fraught with challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. It was a path that required courage, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right, even when the way forward seemed uncertain. With Max by his side, a loyal companion in an often unforgiving world, and the echoes of Eleanor's story guiding him like a beacon in the darkness, he knew he was ready. No matter what lay ahead, no matter what trials or tribulations the future might hold, he would meet them with the same quiet resolve that had carried him this far. And beneath the vast night sky, with the stars shining above and the weight of the past finally lifted from his shoulders, Thomas allowed himself a small, knowing smile.